What do they credit this victory to, David, if anything? And do you know when the president will address his supporters? I guess John Kerry, as you know, is speaking at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Faneuil Hall in Boston. Any plans for the president's remarks?
Yes, I should have mentioned that at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock this afternoon Eastern Time, back at the Ronald Reagan Building here in Washington, is when we expect the president to make that speech. You know, his chief speechwriter, Mike Gerson, was aboard Air Force One yesterday working on presumably 2 drafts of a post-election speech, and now they'll be able to put draft A on top. The president acknowledging to Senator Kerry in the phone call the bitterness in the country, how deeply divided the country is. The president said yesterday that he acknowledges how much passion there is in the country, both for him and against him. And as Tim Russell suggested a moment ago, is something that he's certainly going to have to address.
And getting out the vote, was that credited with the success of this election in terms of rural conservatives?
There's no question, Katie. If you look at Florida, for example, their registration was up by some 13%. New Republican voters, Republicans that they targeted as irregular voters. Grove had made a determination after the 2000 race, when they felt they had lost some 4 million evangelical voters who just threw their hands up and decided not to vote, that would not happen again. They did everything they could to court their conservative base. It became a base election, a voter turnout election. They feel like they really did that they got the Republican Party and conservatives across this country fired up in a way that they had not been before. And if you look in Florida, all but 2 counties, the president outperformed his totals from the 2000 race. In Ohio as well, the major counties, including in the Northeast, the Democratic stronghold, the president outperformed his totals from 2000. They are going to look at this race and say Karl Rove's, Ken Mehlman's model of voter turnout indeed proved to be very successful.
All right, NBC White House correspondent David Gregory. David, thanks so much.
Sure.
It may sound like a little bit of a moot point right now, but NBC News can now confirm that the state of Nevada will go in President Bush's column, giving him a total of 274 electoral votes. Again, Nevada, with 5 electoral votes now in the president's column, at the moment a total of 274.
Right, with still some states not declared yet, right?
1, 2, 3, 4 states still not declared.
Have to look at the rink to
That's
figure
right.
that out.
From NBC News, this is a Decision 2004 special report. Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. After one of the longest nights of his life, John Forbes Kerry is arriving at historic Faneuil Hall in his hometown of Boston, Massachusetts, to make a concession speech to the nation after calling President Bush this morning to concede in their very hotly contested race for the presidency. The president said to him, "You are an admirable, worthy opponent. You should be proud." Well, he may be proud, but he's got to be deeply disappointed as he goes into Faneuil Hall, the historical meeting place in Boston. It was there shortly before the Democratic Convention. There he is with his wife, Teresa Heinz Kerry. They've been at this for more than a year now. And going into the final weekend of this campaign, the Kerry campaign believed that it had won, that it was on the verge of defeating President Bush by winning in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, which in fact he did win, and maybe even in Florida. But Ohio proved to be the obstacle that he could not overcome. It was the linchpin in this election, and the 20 electoral votes last night, when they went to President Bush, there was no way that John Kerry could really get home in this presidential election. The map looks very much like it did 4 years ago. I'm joined now by NBC's Tim Russert, who is at my side as well. The map does look very much like it did 4 years ago, and that represents some real challenges for the Democratic Party, and that process is already underway, Tim.
Tom, George Mitchell, the former leader of the Democrats in the Senate, sat right next to you last night and said, Tom, we have to become a national party again. It's just not enough for the Democrats to appeal to the West Coast and the East Coast and hopefully pick off a few battleground Midwest states. That entire South, Southwest, Rocky Mountain area is gone. So we now have Hillary Clinton emerging, John Edwards from North Carolina, the vice presidential candidate, Howard Dean, Bill Richardson, the Hispanic governor from New Mexico, they're all stepping forward saying, well, perhaps we ought to start thinking about 2008. They won't do this publicly yet, but it's a party that really has to look inward and say, who do we want to be? And how do we connect with the country as a whole about issues like faith and things that really do connect and matter to people? It's a big challenge.
Yeah, it is, and it goes well beyond geography, obviously, because it's the geography of the culture. Senator Ted Kennedy, who is a mentor to John Kerry, and was at his side last night as they made the decision not to accept initially the results that we broadcast from Ohio and wait until this morning. And once that John Kerry saw this morning that it was 130,000 some votes that he would have to overcome with provisional ballots, he knew that that was not likely to be possible. Let's just stay in Faneuil Hall if we can while we watch everybody get into place there.
So many ironies today, Tom. The last senator from Massachusetts, the last United States senator to be elected president, John Kennedy of Massachusetts.
Right, won narrowly against Richard Nixon in an election that went on all night long.
And I read today that is the 71st birthday of Michael Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, who lost to George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, are you there in the room somewhere at Faneuil Hall?
What's the problem with the page?
Some of the people who were part of the decision-making process. I've seen some of the senator's family. They describe a late-night session in which the senator was presented his legal options.
Here he is, and that's not him, I think.
A beloved figure among the traveling press, Marvin Nicholson. He has also been the stand-in for the senator because he is about the same height as the senator, about an inch taller, which is why he's just buckling his knees a bit. He always sets the room before the senator speaks. In getting back to the discussions in the middle of the night, I'm told that the senator was presented what many described as a scorched earth legal strategy, and they decided that it would be the equivalent of buying a Powerball ticket. It might be possible, but it was so unlikely that they did not want to put the country through it. When he reviewed his options somewhere, I'd say between 3 and 4 in the morning, it became clear that it was very unlikely. They felt there was no need to make a decision at that time, to try to get a bit of rest, to let it play out to this morning. And then late this morning, the senator told his campaign manager that he had made the decision. The phone calls began, the concession to the president, and aides describe him, of course, as being deeply disappointed, but also saying that he is in a good mood. They cite that he earned more votes than any other candidate for national office except President Bush. They're proud of that achievement, and they say it simply came down to the ground game, an asset that they thought they had in their column, but clearly they acknowledge that the Republicans were more effective in getting out the vote, and that's what they say made the difference. Advisors say they had known it could come down to Ohio. They had known it could come down to a relatively small margin, and that's exactly what happened. So the late night decision was presented to the senator. He reviewed his options, and I'm told that he will, in his remarks today, describe what he thinks the country needs to move forward. Also, of course, to thank his supporters. Tom, this room is filled with a whole range of those who supported John Kerry, those who had the financial means to back him, and the young people who put the sweat equity, the volunteers and young staffers who work so hard and have been shedding some tears. So we expect that the senator will make those remarks.
Thank you very much, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, who's had almost no sleep and certainly no home life in the last 9 months as she's been out there on the campaign trail, and she deserves a break as well. Senator Kerry is married to Teresa Hines Kerry. Obviously, his home is in Boston. They share a home on Nantucket. She has, as you know, a lot of money, and a lot of that money is in a foundation that she spends on a wide variety of philanthropic causes. But they don't have to worry about where the next paycheck is coming from, even though he's been defeated. He'll be going back to the United States Senate as well, and we'll see what he'll decide to do at that time. As a young man, JFK, John Forbes Kerry, was on a sailboat with the other JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And it was about then, probably, that he began to think about what his own destiny may be, just as Bill Clinton thought about that when he met John F. Kennedy in the Rose Garden of the White House when he went to Boys Nation from the state of Arkansas.
George W. Bush took great delight in this campaign, quoting John Kennedy back to John Kerry about paying any price, bearing any burden. And Caroline Kennedy, President Kennedy's daughter, jumped in and said, wait a minute, don't be using my dad's name against John Kerry.
The man who wrote those words, Ted Sorensen, wrote for the New York Times and sent up a rocket as well. It has been a highly spirited campaign, obviously. A year ago at this time, there was some question about whether John Kerry could get the nomination. Howard Dean had a real head of steam. He represented what he called the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. He made Iraq the central theme of his campaign. His outspoken opposition to it. And both John Kerry and John Edwards had to begin a shift in their own positions. They had given the president authority to go to war. They had issued press releases saying that they were proud of that vote. And then within the Democratic base of the party in Iowa and places like New Hampshire and so on, they had to make a shift, and it probably hurt John Kerry in the end because he voted against the $87 billion supplemental. And we heard again and again and again, I voted for it before I voted against it. And the president saying to the country, how can you trust this guy?
I had a Democrat say to me last night, Tom, how different would the campaign have been if John Kerry had voted against the war resolution, but then money for the troops?
Right.
It would have been much more intellectually consistent and perhaps made it easier for him to connect with the American people in that way, but we'll never know.
Let's go to NBC's David Gregory at the White House, who's been up all night as well. David, we're going to hear from the president in what, about an hour or so?
That's right. At 3 o'clock, he's going to finally make that speech he kept promising over at the Ronald Reagan Building here in Washington. The top advisor saying that the president will be humble, will be gracious, will speak about with optimism about the future, and will also talk, as you and Tim have been talking about kind of repairing the breach, speaking to this polarization in the country. But as much as the president may be interested, Tom, in making overtures, make no mistake, he is ready to plow ahead on his agenda. He has been calling those candidates who are now new Republican senators and saying to each and every one of them, it's time to get it done, to move on to the second-term agenda. The president has made no bones about the fact that he will move quickly on Social Security reform, making his tax cuts permanent, as well as continuing the war on terror in a way that is as aggressive as he thinks is necessary. And as much as this campaign debate focused on Iraq, I don't think we can overstate how important to this campaign the values debate became. They turned out their conservative base, their Christian right, and they did it on issues like gay marriage, like abortion. Day in and day out on the campaign trail, Tom, especially down to the end, an appeal to conservative, cultural Democrats on those issues. They were important.
All right, here's the Kerry family now, the daughters Vanessa and Alexandra. And Teresa Heinz Kerry's sons, don't know whether they're there or not. Chris Heinz was a very prominent member of the campaign entourage. One of the daughters is a filmmaker, the other one is a Harvard Medical School student. It's been a long, hard road for them as well. They've had a great time. They've handled themselves extremely well, all of the children. You can say the same thing for the Bush daughters as well, and for Vice President Cheney and Lynn Cheney's daughters. They were out on the campaign trail, and in fact, one of them became probably more prominent in the campaign than she might have liked, and certainly more than the Vice President and Lynn Cheney might have liked. Vanessa and Alexandra Kerry were very prominent at their father's side last night. Alexandra was sent to Hawaii when it appeared that that state, traditionally Democratic, may be in play.
Elizabeth Edwards.
Yeah, that's Elizabeth Edwards, who is, and Teresa Heinz Kerry. Very tough for the wives of these candidates because they have to give their all and provide emotional support to the candidates at the same time. And in the case of Teresa Heinz Kerry and Elizabeth Edwards, two